Alright, so next up, everyone's favorite time, FRQ review. As always, before we get started, be sure to pick up your copy of the FRQ scoring guidelines. The link to that paper can be found in the description box. If you haven't completed the FRQ yet, be sure to pause the video and do that before continuing. So how about we take a look at our FRQ? Mr. Stedman finds himself in 1960s Yale, where he somehow got wrapped up in a pretty unethical experiment where he is forced to shock an individual whenever he answers a question incorrectly. After several painful shocks, the participant states that he no longer wishes to continue, but the professor running the experiment insists that Mr. Stedman should continue, saying it is crucial to do so. Visibly uncomfortable, Mr. Stedman questions whether he should continue. As you can see, like other FRQs, this FRQ is divided into 3 sections where you can earn a total of 7 points. And I cannot stress following the SOTA's guidelines enough, so as is tradition, we will start with Part A, which asks us to explain how the provided AP Psych terms might influence me in continuing with the experiment. Alright, so our first point is obedience to authority, which is just a social influence where someone acts in response to an order from a perceived authority figure. Now, how can we apply this to our prompt? Well, we could say that Mr. Stedman perceived the professor as an authority figure, and as a result felt the need to follow his demands. And just like that, you earned yourself your first point. So let's skip a line and move to our next term, cognitive dissonance, which is one of the trickier concepts in psychology to understand, but an oh so important one. Cognitive dissonance occurs when someone attempts to produce some form of psychological discomfort because 2 or more of their thoughts contradict one another. The classic fox and grapes example simplifies this theory a bit. So a hungry fox sees a grapevine hanging from a tree and decides he wants to eat some of those grapes. So he walks over to the tree and unsuccessfully tries to get the grapes down. After several failed attempts to reach the grapes, the fox stops trying and decides that he doesn't really want the grapes anyways. So we can see cognitive dissonance occurring in the fox. So the fox is going to have 2 thoughts. 1, I want the grapes, and 2, I can't reach the grapes. As you can see, these 2 thoughts, or cognitions, conflict with one another. So to decrease the level of cognitive dissonance, the fox rationalized his failures by saying he didn't really want the grapes anyways. So how exactly can we apply this to my experience with the Milgram experiment? So remember, for cognitive dissonance to occur, I need to have 2 inconsistent thoughts that cause psychological discomfort. So to score our point here, we could say that Mr. Stedman thought what he was doing is wrong, but still continues to do so because he feels the need to follow the experimenter's demands. To justify his feelings, Mr. Stedman decides that he's not in charge of the experiment, so it's not really his fault if the learner gets hurt. We mention our 2 inconsistent thoughts and explain how this led to some type of psychological discomfort. It was a tough one, but we get the point. Alright, so now let's move on to Part B of the FRQ, which is going to ask us to explain how the following psych terms might influence me in stopping the experiment. First we have altruism. Altruism is the unselfish regard for the welfare of others. To score a point here, you could say that Mr. Stedman stops the experiment because he is worried about the safety and well-being of the learner. So yeah, that point was a bit easier than the last one. So let's skip a line and move on to our next point of a strong superego. Part of Freud's personality theory, the superego is the self-evaluative moral component of our personality that is formed through parental expectations and societal rules. So how exactly might a strong superego influence me to stop the experiment? Well, to earn this point, you could say something along the lines of, Mr. Stedman has a strong superego and as a result feels guilty about harming another person, so he decides to stop the experiment. Alright, so Part B is complete. Now let's move on to our final section, Part C. Part C asks us to use the provided AP Psych terms to explain my nervous behavior. Part 5 is the alarm stage of the General Adaptation Syndrome. The General Adaptation Syndrome is the 3-stage stress response system humans go through when exposed to a stressor. This point asks us to focus on the first stage of GAS, the alarm stage. When the body is first exposed to a stressor, it enters the alarm stage. Your heart rate increases, your endocrine system releases adrenaline, and you begin to enter fight or flight. To apply this term to the prompt, we could say that being faced with the stress of the experiment, Mr. Stedman's fight or flight activates. This heightened sense of physiological arousal can explain his nervous behavior. Moving on. Point 6 is the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the activation of the fight or flight response. To get our point here, we could say that Mr. Stedman's sympathetic nervous system is responsible for his heightened physiological state, causing anxiousness. And our final point, point 7, is going to be the Big 5 trait of neuroticism. As you can probably tell from the name, Big 5, there are 4 other traits to this theory, but since it is asking only about neuroticism, we will focus on that. In the Big 5 personality test, high levels of neuroticism are associated with things such as anger and anxiety. To receive our point, we could say that if Mr. Stedman has a high level of neuroticism, he may be more prone to experience anxious thoughts. Alright, so there you have it, our Milgram Madness Part 1 FRQ. If you have any questions about the FRQ, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section, and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. Alright, that's the bell, so I will see you guys next time. Peace.